DECA family. My name is Zayn Patel. Welcome to the Level Up podcast. Today, I'm joined by Susan Harrow of Harrow Communications. In this episode, we'll be giving you guys tips and tricks to better your public speaking and confidence in both competition and the greater business world, both virtually and on stage. Also sponsoring us today is Harrow Communications. So Susan, why don't you go ahead and take it away? Give us some background on not only you, but your business as well.
Yeah, so I'm a media trainer and marketing strategist and author of Sell Yourself Without Selling Your Soul, published by HarperCollins. And what I focus on is working with CEOs and entrepreneurs, authors, speakers on growing their business with publicity using sound bites effectively in any kind of media appearance, from anything like this, a podcast, all the way through TV magazine interviews, so they can double or triple their business by using these sound bites effectively, saying the right thing to the right audience at the right time, so you inspire them to engage with you or shift an idea, whatever that might be for you.
Perfect. I love that. I love that. And so just in terms of those sound bites, I know a lot of it really comes down to the public speaking aspect of it, right? So how are you getting those sound bites out, whether it be through that podcast or through an event that you're holding? So just want to go ahead and dive a bit more into your experience specifically. Did you ever struggle with public speaking or get nervous before an event?
I still do. I still can't. I didn't even eat before this one. I've been doing this for like 30 years and I still get nervous. But the point is to change that energy, to transform that energy of nervousness into excitement and just to accept it, whether you're sweating, whether you're breathing. And there are a lot of techniques that you can do to calm down, not only in the moment, but practice. And one of the first things to practice is breathing. And I think a lot of people now, because of COVID, know a lot more about breathing, but the simplest one is box breathing, which is 4 in, hold the breath for 4, 4 out, hold the breath for 4. And when you start to do that, your autonomic nervous system begins to calm down. So, and the other thing that I highly recommend is, and we can't do this right here on Zoom, at least I would, but is to shake all over. So you're shaking your head, you're shaking your booty, you're shaking your arms, you're just to do that to get all the energy out. So breathing is once you've kind of calmed down. I like to shake first and get that all of everything out. So you're stomping your feet, you're wiggling all around. You can, do this in private or do this in the green room, wherever you are with a bunch of people. And then do the breath. But the breathing and the shaking are things that you can practice on your own every single day, because that's relaxing. They're both relaxing. So once you start to be able to calm and still your mind, it'll translate when the real time comes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I use box breathing all the time, and I actually go through and do meditations in the morning so I can get myself prepared for the day. That way there's no nervousness moving forward. And I guess one of the key components of nervousness, at least one that I've experienced, is the fact that I'm always worried about the audience, right? So am I speaking so that way they can listen? And then how are they going to perceive the words? Are they going to be listening to the entire thing? So I guess how would you sort of understand your audience a bit more, maybe what types of things you can say within public speaking, certain words or certain things that you can do either virtually by doing hand movements, or even when you're in person, potentially emphasizing certain words to continue to keep your audience engaged the entire time?
So the first thing is mindset. It's not about you, it's about what you're here to give your audience. So let's shift that right away. So instead of thinking about, oh my God, what are people thinking about me? If you start to think about creating a connection heart to heart, and we start to automatically, you can even put your hand on your heart automatically, you start to be able to connect with your audience. So you're thinking about, what am I here to give and how can I best serve? What can I say that my audience needs to know? I always ask those two questions. What does my audience need to know now, and how can I help? So the focus is on them and not me. Then if I'm in a live audience, I'm observing, but you think that you know what people are thinking, but you don't oftentimes. I mean, I've been in an audience where, in some of my teachings and my workshops, where somebody will just have a blank face and I'm like, oh, they are so not with me. So we're starting to assume things of people that we can't possibly know. And I remember then going around the circle and the woman said, I'm here taking notes for my daughter. And I was thinking that she wasn't engaged, right? So what we want to do is also, whether it's like right now I'm looking at the Zoom dot, I'm not looking at you because that appears that I'm looking directly at my audience. I'd rather be looking at you so I could see your response,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, yeah.
then I'm sacrificing looking at the audience. So I apologize for that for you. I will look at you in between, but it makes a better call, and a better connection if you keep your eyes focused 100% on the dot. In person, what you want to do to connect your audience and start to relax and start to read your audience is to that breathing and connecting even before you walk onto the stage. You've already imagined that your feet are like roots going into the ground and connecting to all the people in the audience, that they're your friends, that they want to do well by you. And then the
Hmm.
second thing is actually looking into people's eyes slowly. So you might spend 5 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds looking per person. What that does is that gets the energy going in the room. So you don't have to look at everybody, you don't want to scan. You want to pick a few people, the friendly faces, the smiling faces, the people who are giving you that feedback that you're doing well. Look at them, keep the gaze, and then move your gaze from person to person, and then that'll start shifting the energy. So that's a practical thing in person. So we talked about what happens in Zoom and then, or, any kind of virtual setting. And then you were asking me about reading the audience. That's,
Hmm.
see, if you're not relaxed and you're super nervous, you can't read your audience. So, you
Hmm.
meditating every day and starting to relax, you start to be able to see how people are responding. And I remember when
Hmm.
I first got started, I would say things and I didn't know where the funny parts were or whatever, and people would laugh. And I'd have to make a mental note. Oh, they thought that was funny. That was some off the cuff thing I said, or things that I thought were really important. People weren't paying attention to. And in those early days, what I did is I did an evaluation after every single one. It's like, and I asked them just a couple of questions like, what did you find most valuable? What would you say to other people about of the course or the whatever I shared that day? And
Hmm.
what would you change for next time? Like, what didn't you like? And then I kept refining because when we speak, it's always about refinement and iteration because we're new at this. So we need to see how it lands, see what's important to people, and get that kind of feedback. I think that feedback is
Hmm.
really important. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And I know just double clicking on the idea of reading the audience and really making sure that they understand what you're thinking, or just, receiving your message as well as possible. How would you describe the environment that you're in terms of how it makes you feel, how it potentially affects your overall performance in an event? Do you take your environment and atmosphere and think about that a lot before you get on stage or even in a virtual
Absolutely.
meeting?
I think
And then how do you feed
practice
off of that
in
as well?
practice in the venue that you're going to be in. So if you're going to be
Mm,
on a stage, you never want to be
mhm,
behind a podium. You want to be moving around to connect with the audience. So if it, in that, that's when things get to be live again, right? So we want to be able to connect with everybody on the stage. So when I was training one of my clients to give a talk at 1440 Multi University, we practiced how this was before COVID,
mhm,
obviously. We practiced about where she was going to stand to deliver each message. And one of the most important things about that is being able to, when you connect with the audience, like there were things that she said that were funny that people really responded to, go with it. Like, see if you
mhm,
can continue in that direction. And so you asked me also, you asked me another question about like, oh, managing the medium. Was that the
mhm, mhm.
question? Managing the medium?
Yeah, yeah.
Practicing
Managing
in
the
the
medium, but
medium.
then also feeding off of that audience too, right? So if they are laughing at you, how do you continue to, I guess, potentially adjust it so you're making more jokes, or if they're not, do you cut them out? I guess how do you mitigate that within the presentation itself?
Yeah, so that's where you're fluid. So be prepared so you can be free to be spontaneous. So you have your set agenda and then you leave
Mhm,
some room so you can go off on these tangents where it might not even be saying another joke, it just might be receiving it and really just getting that good feeling going with the audience. And I really noticed that with her when she did that. It was like, oh, well, they really, and what they responded to, of course, was very specific stories, not generalities. But whenever we had these really specific stories or things that popped that you could really see, feel, touch, not intellectual things, really tangible things. Those are the kinds of things that people super responded to, that we worked on really tightly. So in your presentation, you want to have those kinds of stories that people can touch, taste, see, feel, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Because those
yeah.
are the ones that they really respond to. It's
Mhm.
not the intellectual ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the relatability part of it, right? That's how they can sort of begin to just gel with you a lot more. And now you don't feel like you're just a speaker, but now you're, I guess, one of their just acquaintances, or you're somewhat of a friend now, right? Because now they get to just see things that they wouldn't see before. And I was actually listening to something last night just on a webinar about the personality, and bringing that out and making sure that that is sort of the focal point of everything that you do, because that's what people buy into, right? So especially when it comes to public speaking and confidence and going to these big events and talking about either something in tech or business, it's very, very, very difficult to sort of take these topics that are very technical and are just overall, productive to an audience, and take those and sort of make them into a talk where you can still entertain but educate and then excite people as well. And so I love that you mentioned the tangible items, because that just brings the entire experience to life.
And I love that you mentioned personality, because yes, it is your personality and your quirks and the way that you are. That's what we're really entranced by.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
who you are. And by the way, it is
Yeah.
possible to make. I was working with an executive at a very large corporation, and his area was data, which is 3 hour presentations of
Hmm.
data. I
Hmm.
mean, if you can
Yeah.
imagine, you know how, and we were tasked with like, how do we enliven that? So we started digging in, right? And I was like, oh my God, how do you hold somebody's attention for 3 hours?
Yeah.
It's really long. And so we started finding out, like, we took parts of his past, because he had a really unusual past that people could relate to. And he had done a lot of positions in that company. So then that's the way he could relate to each person in the audience. I've done your job. So we created stories around that. And then we said, what can we do? How can we very consciously interject humor? Because people sitting for that long, you want to get them jostled up with humor, because
Hmm.
that sort of shifts your mind and that opens your mind. So you want to say something that's humorous, not necessarily a joke, but something is that is funny and or mildly amusing. And then we were talking about, like, even like taking things from history, or taking things from the news, or taking things from what's going on in the culture today, to make it like super relevant for people. So you can, when you
Hmm.
start to think about all these things, you can start to have a really lively talk by pulling all of these different segments into your talk.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then that's the soundbite process, right? Where you can then transfer that and make it provide even more value to your audience, after the conversation. So I guess I like to think about presentations in three ways, and I'm very, very excited to hear your feedback on this, or sort of what your model is with your clients. But I go into all presentations that I do with the three E's that I mentioned before. So number one for me is to educate my audience. So what type of value am I providing during this talk, this podcast, anything that I'm doing, right? What are the value points? Second is to entertain. So how am I keeping you engaged? What are we discussing that's going to continue to keep you looking at me, or keep you laughing, or go to your friend and say, oh yeah, he's interesting, you should go ahead and take a look at his talk. And then the third thing is excite. So that also taps into the word of mouth marketing part of it. But when you leave my talk, or when you leave the podcast, what are you thinking about? And then how do I continue to stay in your mind? So now it's just not a simple episode or a simple talk or even a presentation that you've listened to, but it's become this experience that is unforgettable. And now you have this drive to come and see me again. And that way I'm increasing more of that retention, right, of my audience as well. So tapping into that, how do you define success for all of your clients before they go into a presentation? And then what type of model do you use as well?
Model.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love that you have your, what, entertain. Wait, it was educate first,
Educate,
educate,
entertain, and
entertain,
excite.
and then excite. Yeah, those are great 3 E's. Did you make those up yourself?
I did, yes.
Yeah, those are really wonderful, because I think in today's world we do really need all three of those.
Hmm.
And they're not necessarily separate, but they're um, we want all three. And I think the key thing is to tell the kind of stories that land that people can repeat, right? So I'm trying to think of one in this moment because I'm like, well, how am I telling a story that they're going to remember? Um, so there's all different when we talk about sound bites or messaging, there's all different types and you want to have a range of them. So one might be a story, a statistic, a fact, a vignette, a one liner, and you want to have kind of a mix of those. So in the speech, you want to have some stories that are maybe a little longer, depending on how long you've got, right? And then you want to have those one liners that you want people to remember. So sometimes they don't have to be your own. They can be,
Mhm.
they can be like, I have so many favorite sayings. My very favorite one, I have a couple of very, very favorite ones, but from Gandhi is, my life is my message. Because I think that everything you do, say, are, and think, from your words to your website, how you treat other people, is the message that you're giving, that people
Mhm.
pick up
Mhm.
from you on different levels. So that's one of my favorite sayings, and that's super easy to remember. And my other one's from the Dalai Lama, which is, be kind whenever possible. And then my caveat is, oh, and be kind whenever possible, it is always possible. And my caveat to that is, but it is not easy. It is not easy because,
Yeah, yeah.
Charles Schultz said, um, I love humanity. It's people I hate. And I think that people can be extremely difficult, right? All of us are difficult people. And so I think that practicing that's part of like a daily practice. And these are things that people
Mhm.
pick up from you, from your presence. So when you said, like, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is your presence, which is the sum of all of your experiences, but it's also how you've internalized your values, how you show up, how you treat other people, the respect you're giving your audience, and that they're giving back to you, because how you show up is the energy and the excitement and whatever that is that you're going to get in return.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that when
Okay,
you
okay.
stay
I like
focused
that.
on those things,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
really important. And so thinking about the stories, I did want to say one other thing about stories, because what I've heard a lot of speakers do is tell a funny story, or tell a story that does not relate to their topic or how they're going to educate. So you said, I want to educate. Well, anything that you
Mhm.
then tell that you're going to entertain or excite has to relate to, what are you giving your audience? It can't just be a random
Mhm.
thing. So I think that's super important, because I think that people who just start speaking, it's a little more random. And you want everything to be intentional. And the bigger picture is, what do I want the outcome of this to be? Because if you are presenting to an investor and you want the outcome to be, they give you money. What I noticed on DECA, when I was a judge for DECA, just
Mhm.
now, and then
Mhm.
everybody, not one
Yeah, yeah,
person,
yeah.
not one person asked me for the money. There were some great presentations about why they should get the money. I think it was 70,000 or something like that.
Mhm.
Not
Mhm.
one person actually said, um, "Can I have? I hear you. It sounds like you're really interested. Are you agreeing to give
Yeah,
give
yeah.
me $70,000?" So when you
Mhm.
are in front of investors, you have to ask, and for anyone, because I know it might seem obvious. They were presenting them for the money, but nobody asked me for it.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So super important to state actually what you want. So if you are talking to an investor, when they act like they're on board, you can actually ask. Um, it looks like you're excited about my idea. Are you on board? And if you are on
Mhm.
board,
Yeah, yeah.
are you saying that you will invest, 100,000, $1 million, $10 million in my
Mhm.
business? So
Mhm.
it has to be that clear, and that
Yeah,
might seem
yeah.
obvious to people, but it's also, sometimes in a talk, you need to be very specific about what you want the outcome to be and what you want the point to be too, because sometimes people will miss it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that's what I call
It's the
epiphany.
implicit parts too,
Yeah.
right?
What's that?
Yeah. It's the implicit parts, the parts that you assume the other person or the second party is going to understand, whereas we're in a situation where they don't, and then the message isn't fully delivered. And so you walk out and you're thinking, okay, well, this isn't the outcome that I wanted, but you didn't actually go ahead and ask for that outcome. And so I love that you mentioned that you have to go ahead and actually ask for the seed funding. It's not going to be given
Yeah.
to you, right? So it is a reward for the presentation, the work that you've done, and it's not expected prior to walking into the room.
Yeah, and it's okay. I think when you're talking to an audience, you do want some of that feedback. Like I really, the most effective
Mhm.
presentations are interactive. So you want to create movement, and because movement combined with speaking is going to land and be most memorable. So even any kind of movement. So you have two people doing something together, or that's usually quickest when you're giving a speech because people are
Mhm.
sitting next
Mhm.
to each other. So you have them interact, but you want to have a back and forth. This comes from preachers, and it's called the call and response. So you'll
Mhm.
see very experienced speakers saying, "Isn't that right?" And then the people go,
Yeah.
"Oh," and go, "I can't hear you. Is that right?" And people will go, "Yes, that's right." So you already start to get them in action with you.
Mhm.
So if you are in a
Yeah.
presentation like with an investor or something, you want to be asking some of those questions along the way if that's what kind of presentation
Mhm.
it is. Is this landing with you? Are you is this something you think is can play in the marketplace? Like it's okay to start getting those. We're often afraid to ask those questions, and then we're
Mhm.
afraid to see the response in the audience too, but sometimes that's the only way you're going to know because it's hard to read the audience, especially on Zoom.
Yeah.
It's super
Mhm.
hard to
Mhm.
read that. So sometimes on Zoom, we're going to do more hand movements. So we're saying, like, are you agree with me? If you agree with me, say, go like this. So people are in motion, right? Versus in
Mhm.
person, we're most likely going to get a more verbal. If you're with
Verbal,
me,
yeah.
say yay. You get this, say yay. You want me to talk more about this? Yes. And then so it's even okay
Mhm.
about that. Like, have I talked enough about
Mhm.
that? Depending on how informal it is. But oftentimes, if it's a less formal thing, I'll say, have you heard enough about that? Do you want me to go on to the next one? Are we ready to jump in? And then you start getting that feedback.
Mhm. And do you always practice this call to response, or I guess what type of scenario would you do this in? So is it better to practice this in a more formal environment and potentially less formal? And how do you read the room or just understand the situation to ensure that when you do something on those lines, it's not going to potentially turn the person off or upset them, where they're not going to want to give you that investment or their time or attention anymore?
Yeah, you start out with things that are really easy. Like you always see comedians going on the stage and say,
Mhm.
"How are we doing tonight? How is everybody?" "Fine." "I'm fine." And then so they already start to get that going. "Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be in your town. I love your town." Ah, right? So it's some kind of response where you want people to begin to respond right away. And it's simple at
Mhm.
first. It may be just a simple yes or no. So, am I right? You hear a lot of people say, "Am I right?" Or "Is this so? Do you agree?" And people go, "Yeah," because that's a very, very
Mhm.
small investment. So, you want to start with small investments first and start to build that investment in you. So, something that sometimes you ask questions where you're going to get a response that
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
going to get. Yeah. So, does that does
Yeah.
that does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I like the fact that we're starting with something simple, right? So it's not something too complex, just as simple as asking you how you are doing, and then just attempting to understand, okay, what is the response there? Is it 100% response rate? Is there a 75%? And then based on that, you can then just continue the fluid motion that you alluded to earlier. So then you
Yeah.
can sort of adjust your talk a bit, or even include more of these questions throughout your presentation. So you're keeping them engaged and you're continuing to seek their attention. So that way they're retaining more, they're engaged more, and then the overall talk quality just continues to increase.
Yeah, and you listen for the response. So, like if you tell something sad, like sometimes we tell sad stories and people go, "Hmm," and you'd go, "Sad,
Mhm.
right?" You know?
Yeah.
So you don't need another response from them, but you're actually acknowledging that they've acknowledged you, right? So And then you can do the same thing when people are laughing, ha 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 ha, crazy, right? Or funny, right? And
Hmm.
sometimes that's enough to keep something going, but it's also just an acknowledgement of like, you hear me, I hear you. And some of those
Hmm.
things, a lot of that when you're relaxed can happen naturally. So I always make sure that there's room for the natural stuff, but I plan in the kinds of responses
Hmm.
that I think I want. Now, do they all land well or are successful? No.
Yeah, yeah.
So you think, well, maybe that wasn't the right question, or I didn't ask it in the right way, or it wasn't the right time. So those are
Hmm.
questions I'm always asking myself and refining, and not beating myself up in the moment if it didn't go, and
Yeah.
enjoying the unexpected, because a lot of times things just don't go as planned.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's part of the chemistry, right, between the audience and the speaker, and that's just something that develops over time. But I love that you mentioned not beating yourself up in the moment. So how do you make sure that you don't let your subconscious mind sort of tear you apart if you make a mistake or you say something that you're not supposed to, or something doesn't deliver the way that you had practiced or planned?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to deal with that. One is self-deprecating remarks about what a big flop you just made. So let's say you tell a story and you thought it was really great and you didn't get any response. You can actually say, "Wow, that really
Mhm.
stunk." I thought that this was the right thing for you. So you can handle it that way. But also, like, if you feel your tummy sink and you just go, "Oh my God," like, and you start to think I'm failing, right?
Mhm.
That's when we
Mhm.
take a breath, and you can even move to a different spot on the stage, or if you're like here on a Zoom, you can take a different
Yeah.
position. So if I was leaning forward, I would just sit back, I would take my breath, and I would recenter, what I call recenter. And sometimes that's just, feet on the ground, lower what happens when we get nervous is it goes up. So, and your voice might even get a little squeaky. So you take that breath, you let it sink all the way down to your tummy. You let it sink all the way down to the ground. It might seem like forever for you, but breathing is really your friend in every situation, particularly that. And then you bring your focus back. So you bring your focus back to what it is you want to say and convey to your audience. And by the way, this happens all the time. I was just doing a webinar last week, and it was for, usually I give webinars um, to consumers, to people like you who are going to buy my courses,
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
well, this was a webinar about getting into O Magazine, but it was for PR professionals. And we had both looked over the slides, the host and I, and as I was presenting it, I could just tell, I'm like, oh my God, this material is so, it's just not, it's for consumers, it's not for PR professionals. And I thought, I have to do something on the spot, because I had that sinking feeling, and I'm like, I'm failing. And I'm failing in
Mhm.
front of my peers.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so I was like sort of devastated, and I thought, no, let me see what I can do. Number one, I said, I'm going to skip a bunch of these slides, because I was tied to a slide presentation too,
Mhm.
which is more
Mhm.
complicated than just being on stage. So I said, I'm going to skip a number of these slides because some of this is not going to pertain to you. So I just zoomed ahead, and then I said, I also have some other material that's not in this webinar that I'm going to pull up as soon as we have a break, that I want to run through for you, that I know will be right for your group, that I knew I had on my computer. So I did
Mhm.
that as
Yeah,
number
yeah.
two. And then number three, I said, I want to start answering your questions because I feel very comfortable spontaneously, and the material wasn't right for them, but I knew I could redeem myself in the questions. And that's what I
Mhm.
did. So those things
Yeah.
were all done on the spot
And
for
that's the
something that
self-awareness
wasn't
part of it
working.
too, right? Like
What's that?
understanding who you are,
Yeah,
understanding yourself, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and then based on that, you
yeah.
can better respond to these situations. So I think self-awareness, especially within the moment, is also really, really huge.
And you would say this was on Zoom, and you said, how did like, I could only see a few people, but I could feel it.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
could
yeah.
feel, I'm like, and I don't know what, not sure what the signal was. It was, but I'm like, oh no, this is so not right. And I thought
Hmm.
the whole presentation is not right. So
Yeah.
what am I going to do then, right? And how
Hmm.
do I salvage the 100 people who are on the line, and
Yeah.
give them what they came to be? So I'm just like, start putting your questions in there. Let's start answering what you want to know. And
Hmm.
that's what I did. Yeah. So with
Yeah.
switching the whole format midstream, sometimes you have to do that.
Hmm.
And you might
Yeah.
actually have to say it. You know what? I prepared this talk. I don't think it's what you need, and I'm going to start switching gears here. Are you with
Hmm.
me?
Yeah. Yeah. Just
Not
have to be
fun.
agile, right? You have to be able to adjust to those conditions.
You do, because that happens all the time. Like we're talking about presentations, but when you start to do media as well, or more podcasts, and somebody asks you a question that totally throws you off, you're going to need to be able to get back on center and stay with what material you want your audience to know, and be
Hmm.
able to do that in a moment. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that just goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? Just providing your audience that value, understanding that they are who you should be oriented around, right? Make sure that they are at the core of everything. So, Susan, thank you so much. That
Oh
wraps
my
up
gosh, it went by
our
so
episode.
fast. I love it. So fun talking to you.
Really, really
Such a great
appreciated
question to
your
ask.
time and your tips. Thank you. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Susan.
Thank you. Really fun. Thank you.